This is a really dangerous moment for the Iranian people. We're already seeing the regime round up and even execute civilians.
Kylie Moore-Gilbert, welcome to The Business. How are people on the ground in Iran reacting to the report that US strikes may not have stopped the country's nuclear program?
I think most people on the ground are just hoping like hell that this doesn't escalate further and that the ceasefire will actually hold. I think people are not particularly concerned with the nuclear program, as they weren't prior to this war either. I mean, it was never a matter of great concern for the broader public. They're more concerned with not being bombed anymore and being able to return to their homes, particularly those who've evacuated Tehran, and also see if anything's been damaged. So that's what I've been hearing from friends on the ground. They don't care much about the nuclear program. They're more concerned about, their own safety and making sure this war doesn't start up again.
Are they concerned that the strikes may continue if it is proven that enriched uranium supplies are in fact still in existence, perhaps at a site called Pickaxe?
I think that's a pretty wise summation. There is a lot of concern that, this regime, which is not trusted by the vast majority of its population, that it might seek to actually race toward a bomb using, that 400 kilograms or so of enriched uranium that Iran has purported to have taken out of the Fordo facility. And people are concerned that rather than de escalate and return to the negotiating table, the regime might actually race in the direction of some kind of illicit nuclear device. And that Pickaxe facility that you mentioned, which I think is really close to the Natanz site that was targeted by the US with those bunker busting bombs as well, it seems even more impenetrable and even more difficult to get to. So if those reports are in fact true, I think there's broad concern both internationally and within Iran that the regime might go down that route.
As we speak, the fragile ceasefire between Iran and Israel remains in place. Financial markets seem to have been reassured that Iran isn't considering further action against US interests. But are there reasons why Iran's attack against the US base in Qatar will have unnerved leaders of territories in the Gulf?
I think it was very unnerving for a number of reasons, despite the fact that it was telegraphed in advance and that the US and Qatar were both given sufficient warning to evacuate the base and the surrounding area and obviously activate their anti missile systems. The fact that Qatar was targeted at all was quite remarkable. I mean, there are plenty of other options. Iran has struck US bases in Iraq, for example, in the past. Qatar is actually quite a close friend of Iran. There was a lot of talk about brotherly relations in the kind of public narrative that came out of the Qataris following this strike. And, it really was quite remarkable to see such a close neighbor that is actually friends with Iran be selected as the target. It's difficult to know why that was. I do think, though, it does send a broader message to the Gulf Cooperation Council states, which are obviously the big oil producing Arab states in the Persian Gulf. Most of them host US military bases, most of them rely on US defense technology. And since the first Gulf War in the 1990s, they haven't really been targeted in any direct way, and that US defense shield seemed to hold as a deterrent. Now, I mean, Iran has shown that it's willing to cross that line, even though it was a largely symbolic strike and didn't really achieve any objectives at all. And that's definitely shaken a lot of other Gulf rulers, and I guess led them to be worried that maybe hosting US bases leads them to be a target rather than has that deterrent effect.
Do you think that some of those Gulf states may now be even challenging whether they can depend on the US at this time?
Well, I guess there are two ways to look at it. On the one hand, yes, one could say that. But on the other hand, the US did assist Qatar in successfully defending against this missile attack. Qatar has US Patriot systems as well as the THAAD system, which is very advanced. These US manufactured anti missile systems held up, defended every single missile that came in the direction of Qatar, And one could also say that, that was a success for the United States, particularly in contrast to the Russian anti-missile batteries that Iran had been using and which were taken out by Israel, some of which before this current war last year during those two retaliatory strikes, but also others this year during the current war, with no Israeli planes downed and no damage done whatsoever, which sort of, I guess, makes it seem that the US missile defense is superior. So, in that sense, I think you could see it both ways. I think there are a lot of jitters in the Gulf, but the US hasn't abandoned them just yet, and they might decide to bunker down alongside the US rather than look further afield.
Israel has spoken openly about its desire for regime change in Iran, going so far as to blow apart the entrance to Evin prison, a place you were incarcerated. Where do events as they stand now leave the regime and the Iranian people?
This is a really dangerous moment for the Iranian people. We're already seeing the regime round up and even execute civilians. Three people were executed today, for example, under charges of spying for Iran or spying for the United States. We know that there's been very sophisticated intelligence penetration of Iran, of the IRGC, of high echelons of the military and the political class. We know that because of those assassinations, including of nuclear scientists, which occurred at the beginning of this conflict. So obviously, there's going to be great paranoia within the regime, and there's going to be attempts to hunt down those informers and those people on the inside who've provided that information. But that being said, Iran has never been good at this. They're very, very corrupt. People are promoted on the basis of ideology and adherence to the ideology of the Islamic Republic over, proficiency and skill. And they do have a tendency to sort of have a very wide dragnet, arrest a whole ton of innocent people, get them to confess under torture, and then say, job's done, we've found the spies, we've executed them, and move on. And this has sort of typically been their approach. And as it's shown, I mean, it's been a very weak and ineffective approach and has resulted in hundreds of people losing their lives or being sentenced to lengthy prison terms who've done nothing wrong whatsoever. So the concern is that this is going to ramp up and that the retribution and the revenge taking of this regime will only increase after the bombs stop falling, and the Iranian people will pay the price for that.
Kylie Moore-Gilbert, thank you for joining the program.
Thanks for having me on.